Morning, everyone. My name is Robert Cocuzzo, as you just heard. I am a writer, I am an author, I'm an editor, but above all, I consider myself a storyteller. And the story that I want to tell you today begins right here. This little molehill in Massachusetts. How many people know this hill, Neshoba Valley? Wow, okay, good. So I'm not talking to strangers here. All right. This is where I grew up skiing. My parents gave me this great gift as a kid. They enrolled me in an after-school ski program, so every Wednesday I would clunk onto a bus and it would take me out to this little molehill, and this is where I fell in love with the intoxicating freedom you find sliding down snow. Now, I love skiing so much that when I wasn't on Neshoba Valley, I was squirreled away in my parents' basement watching movies of skiers. Good, thank you. Obsessing over peaks like this. They were mountains that were out of my imagination, that I didn't think existed. It was so foreign from the experiences I had as a kid. But beyond obsessing over these mountains, I was fascinated by a person, and his name was Doug Coombs. Doug Coombs is a pioneer in every sense of the word. He revolutionized ski technology. He charted hundreds of first descents in the farthest reaching mountains in the world. And above all, he was a guide for many, many people. He had this amazing ability to instill confidence in people and enable them to do things that they thought were impossible. For me as a kid growing up in Massachusetts, Doug Coombs was unequivocally my hero. This is someone that I just looked at as this person that existed in a different world, someone that I might never be able to truly understand. However, when I graduated college, I decided I was going to pursue my childhood dream. I was going to move to Jacksonville, Wyoming, and live in a western ski town. I was going to actually see some of these mountains. And when I was in Jackson Hole, I made a discovery that would change the next 5 years of my life. I learned that Doug Coombs, the superhero of my childhood, hadn't grown up in the wilds of Wyoming or in the far reaches of Alaska. Doug Coombs grew up 10 miles away from me in Massachusetts. Okay? Not only did he grow up 10 miles away from me in Massachusetts, he grew up skiing that same tiny little molehill in Neshoba Valley, this tiny little speed bump. Learning that really blew my mind because I thought, how does this guy go from skiing this tiny little molehill to becoming arguably the greatest big mountain skier to ever live? I mean, king of the big mountains. That question kept me up at night, okay? Unfortunately, I could never ask Doug Coombs himself these questions because in 2006, Doug Coombs was killed in the French Alps. He was killed trying to save the life of a young protege of his, a man named Chad Vanderham. Around the time that I made these discoveries, both the parallels of my life and Doug Coombs' life, and then also his untimely demise, I was also trying to become a writer. I was in Jackson Hole, working at a restaurant, and I was looking for a story to tell. And in this moment, when I heard about this story, I felt like it traveled through time and found me. And I was going to do everything I could to tell it. But I decided that I wasn't just going to stop at interviewing people. I wasn't just going to call people on the phone and hear these stories or read the articles about him or watch the movies I watched of him. I was going to go to these places. I was going to walk in his foot tracks, and I was going to ski in his ski tracks. I was going to do everything I could to understand not only the legend of Doug Coombs, I wanted to understand who the man was. And so that's what I did. I went around the world for 5 years. I traveled to the ski destinations that defined his career. I lived in the mountain towns that he made his home, and I spent time with the people that were in his life. And in some cases, I skied some of the runs that he skied. Now, something more incredible happened beyond the skiing, beyond the mountains, beyond the mountain towns. An incredible thing was I started getting connected into this energy. I started having these moments of serendipity that were inexplicable, in which I would bump into someone that I was looking for, or this piece of information that I was seeking would just literally arrive at my door. And it was this just serendipity that I couldn't deny. And I started to seek out, and I started to feel this connection with Doug Coombs. Now, all those adventures, they culminated in one place, one obvious place, if you really think about it. I'm tracking his life. I begin where he started in Neshoba, and I'm heli skiing in Alaska. I'm doing all these things, but I ultimately have to go to the place where he was killed. So I went to Le Grave, France. Just a quick snapshot of what Le Grave, France is all about. This is the most intense lift-accessed ski area in the world, arguably. It's one lift to the top. There's no avalanche control. There's no marked runs. There's no marked cliffs. There's no ski patrol. If you get in trouble here, the only way off is a helicopter to pick you up. So I moved here for the winter, utterly terrified, just terrified. The moment I walked out of the bus, I was just rattled with fear. Beyond the immediate dangers of skiing these runs was the fact that I was there trying to understand what killed the greatest skier of a generation. If Doug Coombs could be killed in Le Grave, my own demise was entirely feasible. So I went there trying to understand what happened on this day. This is the last photo taken of Doug Coombs and his protege, Chad Vanderham. And they were skiing a run in Le Grave. Now, I understood abstractly what happened. Doug Coombs was trying to save his life, and in trying to save his life, he fell off a cliff and was killed. But I needed to know every detail of that day. If I was going to write the definitive story of my hero, I needed to truly understand what happened. Now, to do that, I couldn't necessarily ski this run, but I could talk to the person who was with him. I could talk to the person that took this photo, and her name was Christina Bloomquist. That's a photo of Christina with Chad, the young man that was killed with Doug. When I met Christina, in another moment of serendipity, I took away one undeniable fact. I knew that Christina Bloomquist wanted to have nothing to do with me whatsoever. She didn't want to talk to me. She did not want to open up a memory that she clearly had buried, and I couldn't fault her for that. I mean, this was the most traumatic moment of her life. She was there resuscitating or trying to resuscitate these two skiers. And yet I also knew that I had come all this way, and she was the reason I was here. I needed to speak to her. So I decided with the last month and a half I had of this trip, I was going to do everything I could to talk to her. So every time I'd see her in the ski lodge, I'd kind of shuffle up awkwardly and pull up a chair, and which I'm not inclined to do, but I did it. And I'd say, hey, Christina, could we talk? And she would inevitably say, we can talk, but I don't want to talk now. And I knew she was just brushing me off. Now, the days are dwindling down. I'm leaving Le Grave, and I'm probably leaving for good, because this place every day poses moments of life and death. So I'm leaving for good, and I'm leaving without achieving my final objective. I'm leaving without speaking with Christina. So the day before I'm supposed to board a plane and head home, to my parents' relief, I decide that I'm going to stalk the top of the mountain. I'm going to stake it out. I'm going to take the lift up there, and I'm going to sit up there all day long. I'm going to wait for her to show up, and I'm going to make my final stand. I waited there all day. I sat in the sun and just doodled in my journal and waited, and I watched every chairlift come up and unload, and she'd never be there. And this crushing sense of defeat is coming over me. I've just spent 5 years of my life. Who knows how much money and time, and most importantly, I've risked my life on numbers of occasions. And now this one piece of evidence that's going to help me understand the man that I want to know is going to escape me. So what I decided to do is I'm going to ski this rundown. I'm going to take the last lift up. I'm feeling incredibly restless, and I need to move. I can't just sit here for the rest of the day. So I ski down. I get on the lift, and I'm by myself. I'm in the gondola. I'm watching the scenery pass out. I take my helmet off. And without even thinking about it, I said out loud, I said, Doug, make this happen, man. Make this happen. I've come so far for you, man. Make this happen. The gondola comes to the top of the mountain. The doors open, and I kid you not, she's standing A1, right there in the door. She's silhouetted by the sun. She's by herself for the first time I've seen her by herself. But I can't think about the fact that I just asked Doug Coombs to deliver this person to me. I need to talk to her. This is my shot. So I awkwardly kind of shuffle over. I put my skis up against the little, like the wall there in the ski area, and I follow her out. And again, I kind of get in front of her, and I take my helmet off, and I say, you know, Christina, I'm leaving tomorrow, and I don't have any questions to ask you. But if you have something that you want to tell me, I'm here to listen. And I sat next to her on the picnic table, and we looked up at the mountain. And we're just staring up at the mountain. At this point, I'm content, because I've done everything I can at this point. I've done my best, and if she wants to talk to me, that's totally her choice. And so we're staring up at this mountain, and it's in a silence that's neither awkward or uncomfortable, and we're just kind of sitting there. And then in her own time, Christina starts talking. She starts telling me about her friendship with Doug Coombs. She starts telling me about this man who possessed such remarkable energy, that he just changed people, and that he had this impact that was undeniable. He talked about Chad Vanderham, the young protege, and the connection that he had with Doug, and how he dedicated his life to following him. And then she talked about the events of that day. She talked about how they met at the top of the run, at the last run of the day. They met at the top of the mountain, the last run of the day, and they chose to ski this run together. And she told me about hearing his voice and how horrible it sounded, the horror of him screaming up that Chad fell. Bring down a rope. And she told me about finding his body at the bottom of the cliff. And she told me about what it sounded like to hear the air fill his lungs. Now, I'm listening to this as intensely as I've ever listened to anything in my life. Because I can't take out a tape recorder, I can't pull out a pad of paper and write this down. I need to let what she's saying sink into the deep fabric of my mind so that I can then go off and write this all down. Christina comes to a natural conclusion in her story. I can feel just the deep anguish radiating off her as she's crying and the tears are flowing down from behind her sunglasses. And we're just staring up at this mountain. And as I'm staring up at this mountain and I'm letting that whole scene, that whole story just come over my senses, I start realizing all these things in this one flash of a moment. I realized that at one time, I was a little kid in my parents' basement in Massachusetts, obsessing over mountains like this. And now I was in their grips. I realized that I was led here by a man who I thought I never knew. And yet in this moment, I felt I knew better than anybody. And as those two things are sinking in, this remarkable thing happened. Blackbirds shot up in front of us, and they soared right in front of the peak, and then they fixed their wings, and they floated down in this just mesmerizing formation. And then I realized the legend in Le Grave. The legend is that the blackbirds hold the souls of fallen skiers. What I learned from Doug Coombs had nothing to do with skiing. Skiing was the vehicle to teach me a lesson in my life. And the lesson was about the power of the human spirit. The lesson was about the energy that we all possess and we can choose to stoke up into a roaring blaze. Doug Coombs stoked his energy into a roaring blaze. So much so that even then when he was gone, 10 years gone, I could still feel his warmth and see his light. I could still connect with him. Now, that's a lesson we all can take away because we have all lost somebody. But they are not gone. If you seek out their energy in your life and you pour your own energy and your own passion into having a connection with them, they will come and meet you halfway. Now, energy also changes form. And the energy of Doug Coombs has changed form in a very beautiful way. If you take a long look at this smile of this fun-loving human being, and then you look at these smiles, there's a pretty linear connection. After Doug Coombs passed away, his wife started the Doug Coombs Foundation, which enables children from low-income families to learn how to ski. In the course of Doug's life, he enabled people to achieve impossible feats, things that they thought they weren't capable of. In the same way, this foundation is doing that for these children who have the mountains right out their back door and that they don't have the resources to access them. I was just in Jackson Hole. I was there on Doug Coombs' 58th birthday. And this little girl came up to me And she told me about her days skiing. She's a child from the Doug Coombs Foundation. And I looked into her eyes. And in her eyes, I could see that the energy of Doug Coombs was definitely alive and well. Thank you.